So we have just had announced a new DLC for Gloomhaven Digital. It is the solo items and scenarios from the original Gloomhaven board game. I think it was a Kickstarter reward initially, or it was an optional extra anyway that you could get. Some of these items are some of the most busted, or were some of the most busted that were available, and they've made a lot of changes here. So in this video, we're going to go through all of the items, go through the changes of those items, the basics of this DLC, when we can expect it, and yeah, just all of the rundown for you guys. You get 17 new scenarios, one for each mercenary, 17 new items as the rewards for that, and some new monsters. Now, these items are also going to be locked to the characters who unlock them. So they're actually locked to their unique character. Now, this was a change that has happened in Frosthaven. So in the Frosthaven game that's coming up shortly, the board game, they've actually changed the solo items to only be able to be used by those mercenaries. And this is a good change because it means that they can actually ensure that that item is powerful for that mercenary. But if that item was transferred onto another mercenary, it doesn't just break the game. And that's a few of the problems that they've had with these solo items in the past, is that if you took one item, put it on a different mercenary, it could be ridiculously broken or just way too strong. And it wasn't really the intended effect. So now they're much more limited, but they can now kind of go wild, if you like, and make these really, really suitable for the characters without worrying about some other rules faff where some other character could get hold of it. These missions will be automatically unlocked once you get to level 5 if you're playing on the campaign version of the game, or you'll have to reach it through the story missions if you are playing in Guildmaster. If you're playing multiplayer, what I think is quite cool here is that in a multiplayer save, each player can actually go off on their own and complete their solo missions on their own if they like. Then they can import that item back into their game that they've completed it with their friends, so they can go and do that. So you have this opportunity for all of you maybe to break away, go and get your solo item in some downtime when maybe you're not all getting together for your big multiplayer game. You could also, if you wanted to, just spectate each other trying to complete the solo scenarios, which is a bit interesting, maybe good for a few laughs if you like to like rib on your buddies for not doing a great job, or perhaps if you'd like to really help them get through it because perhaps they might be struggling and you can all kind of like pitch in and help each other to maybe get through a difficult scenario. Now, some of the items have changed quite a bit. Some of them have stayed the same, and some of the scenarios have changed as well. Now, the devs have been kind enough to elaborate a little bit more on the item changes, but I'm not too sure at this stage what the scenario changes are going to be. But you can pretty safely assume that they're going to try and keep the spirit of the mission. But if there was trouble actually implementing the mechanics into Gloomhaven Digital, they've probably changed that slightly, just like they've done on many of the missions in Gloomhaven and Jaws of the Lion as well. One other thing to note here is that this is 17 new items for the mercenaries that are in base Gloomhaven only. The Jaws of the Lion characters, they have their spotlight missions, which are actually inside of Jaws of the Lion itself, which were meant to kind of like highlight their strengths. They're not solo missions, but they were meant to kind of highlight their strengths and give them an item that could be quite good for them. So these are for the original Gloomhaven kind of characters, and I would imagine, don't quote me on this quite yet, but I would imagine that this will not require the Jaws of the Lion DLC to play with. So let's have a look at all of the items, and we can compare the old items to the new items if they've changed. I'm going to start with the starting mercenaries from Gloomhaven, so no spoilers really for the first part, unless of course you count knowing what the solo scenario item is as a spoiler. Some people might do, but then we'll go into the unlockable mercenaries afterwards, and then we'll go through all of their items. So first off, the Brute, we have Imposing Blade. Anytime you kill an enemy during your turn, gain shield 1 for the rest of the round. Now, I think this item is pretty decent if you wanted to go for more of a tanking Brute. However, there are some sort of inconsistencies really, because it is a little bit unreliable, because of course you could just use shield items for your hand slot items if you really cared about gaining shield. And I feel like this one is maybe a little bit hard to hit. And of course, if an enemy is dead or if you've killed a bunch of enemies, then that shield one might go to waste. But I do feel like this is actually a pretty nice utility item. It only takes up one hand slot item, so it's not a huge investment. I do think people who like to run Warhammer might be a little bit disappointed, because of course this would compete with Warhammer in that slot if you do really like to go for that big trample Warhammer turn. But I don't think it's a bad item by any means, and actually could contribute quite well to a tanking build if that's the route that you want to go with. So Imposing Blade, I think, as a good start it is, and this card remains completely unchanged in Gloomhaven Digital's new DLC. The Tinkerer's item is Focusing Ray, which originally was during your heal action, double the value of the heal. It's a single-handed item and it was a single-time use. It was a burn item. So pretty situational, able to give you maybe a big heal, but the Tinkerer generally has a lot of big burn heals, so if you wanted to get like a really big doubling, you'd have to kind of burn a card as well as Focusing Ray. It just felt a little bit too niche for this character and maybe a little bit underwhelming. So this is one that has been changed and has been changed for the DLC. So this is now changed to during your heal ability targeting an ally, you may add +1 heal and strengthen, and it is spent rather than consumed. So it is tapped, if you like, rather than consumed as an item. So that's really, really good. Means that you're actually, every single sort of round, you're going to be able to give somebody an additional point of healing and strengthen them up, which is a really good buff for certain characters who obviously are big damage dealers who like to go for those big attack turns. That's going to be a big, big help. Makes the item much more reusable, and I think actually is a very, very big change and improvement to this item in a much more positive way. Although perhaps maybe you were hoping for something that wasn't quite along the healing route with the Tinkerer as an item, I do feel like that is very core to their mechanics. So yeah, this change to Focusing Ray is going to make them really good. Suddenly the bottom of Restorative Mist, you moving and then potentially healing all your allies, you could add +1 and strengthen to somebody. That's going to be really good. So there's a lot of synergies with some of the smaller heals that this character has now, and especially those bottom heals that the character has, being able to give potentially people strengthen. And the fact that it's only ally targeted as well does mean that you can't do any sort of self-strengthen stuff as well. So make sure that you can't do some self-strengthening stuff on the Tinkerer, which would have been kind of fun, but that is now off the table. So Focusing Ray, really impressed with these changes. I think that turns a pretty unusable item now into an incredibly usable item for sure. Next up, we have the Spellweaver and we have Volatile Elixir, which is during your ranged attack, add +2 attack and gain advantage on the entire attack action, but suffer 2 damage for each attack made. This is a small item and it is a burn. Well, it's just another power potion with advantage as well on it. You do have a bit of a downside there though with that 2 damage for each attack made, and it is restricted to only ranged attacks, so a certain level 9 card cannot use this, but this is pretty damn powerful. More power potions for this character, you're gonna love it, and it's gonna really, really help out. So understandable why they kind of left this item as it was. I think it is very powerful, very combo heavy, and of course being able to maybe do it on fire orbs to get +2 attack on fire orbs, you know, maybe you're going to end up yourself doing 6 damage to yourself. That's quite a lot of damage to yourself, but I feel like it's a very reasonable kind of trade-off for the amount of damage. And of course you've always got the bottom of Mana Bolt to heal yourself up a little bit once you've taken a load of damage through using the elixir. So yeah, very powerful card, very powerful solo item, definitely one that a Spellweaver wants. So if you are playing Spellweaver, probably one you want to spend some time trying to get. Silent Stiletto is the Scoundrel's item that they get, and this has been changed. So the physical version or the old version of this is anytime you perform a melee attack, add Pierce 1 to the attack. It's a little dagger. It's a one-handed item. Not bad, but they've actually now changed that to make it a little bit better in, well, in every regard, really. And it's now been changed to all attacks, not just melee attacks. Now, this is interesting for a couple of reasons, because the ranged build on this character is one that I always like to try out. It's a little bit hard sometimes to do if you're starting at level 1. I feel like it's a build that maybe really kind of finds its feet later on at the higher levels, and it's maybe something that if you came back to the Scoundrel as a higher prosperity character, you'd maybe try out, or if you're playing Guildmaster and you're respecking, for example. So that's a really nice change now. Not limiting this just to melee attacks makes this much more powerful. Means that potentially you could drop something like a piercing bow, and you don't need to use that piercing bow, and it will keep those small little ranged dagger attacks that you have still really relevant against enemies that might have a little bit of shield as you progress up the levels. So yeah, I think this one is a really good change. Really like the change on this one, and this will definitely be a card now that I think the Scoundrels will want to go after, and it does improve them in many ways and gives you just much more flexibility with your build. So for the Cragheart, my best friend, we do have a change. So it used to be during your action where an obstacle is created, create 1 additional obstacle and apply all effects of the action to it. It was a head slot item and it was a spent item, so you could refresh it through long resting or through with other items. Now, this was always a little bit underwhelming because quite often you'd find yourself in pokey rooms struggling to put the extra obstacle down, and it didn't interact with a lot of cards in the way that people may first thought it did. Cards such as Petrify did not interact with this, which I think a lot of people maybe thought they did. And then, so there was a lot of it was just really, it just was quite fiddly, and it didn't really do as much as it first appeared that it did, because it doesn't quite interact in a really great way. Well, they have now changed it to be whenever you create an obstacle, all enemies adjacent to the obstacle gain muddle, and it is just a static effect. So essentially, now whenever an enemy is adjacent to an obstacle that you place, they're going to get muddled, which is a really nice added little benefit. And the sub-theme of muddle in this character is present. It's there on Dirt Tornado, and certainly Cursed Nado is something that a lot of people have played with, and it is well known to be an incredibly strong enhancement to get on that character. And now potentially with this added item as well, if there are any curses left in the deck after your Cursed Nado, then perhaps your obstacles will muddle these people up and help them find them much quicker to get all of those curses out through the deck very, very quickly and efficiently. So I do feel like it's an added benefit. The problem with this being a head slot item, though, is that it does compete with a lot of really good items. Like Eagle Eye Goggles is my favorite item really to use with the Cragheart. Sometimes you might just use Iron Helm as well if you're playing a bit more of a tanky frontliner for your team, depending on your role. So I do feel like this particular item in the slot that it sits is a little bit awkward, but certainly one that's going to be fun to play around with. And if you're playing more of a ranged kind of damage dealing Cragheart potentially at the back, and maybe you can get strengthened through other means, you don't need to rely so much on the Eagle Eye Goggles, then maybe this could be a good one. So certainly still one that you'd want to go and try and grab. Next up, the Mindthief, and another change here. Psychic Knife is their item, and the original was anytime you perform an augment action, add +1 attack to the entire action, and it was a single-handed item. So whenever you play the Mind's Weakness, that little attack 1 that you have on the bottom there then would turn into an attack 2, and vice versa with some of the other attacks that would increase. Now, this was always just a little bit weak because the Mind's Weakness was generally just the augment that you wanted up all of the time, especially at higher levels. So it was quite rare that you would play any other augment. So really, this was limited to just giving you +1 attack on the turn that you played the Mind's Weakness, and then if you were to discard it and then, you know, keep playing it, which you should do if you want to keep your stamina going, you would only ever get really less +1 attack every, you know, rest cycle or something like that if you're playing really efficiently. So yeah, pretty underwhelming really, but they've now changed this to just +2 attack rather than +1, which I think does make this quite interesting and starts to open up the debate as to whether or not we can start to think about cycling our augments a little bit more. Maybe could open up some different build potentials. So although I don't feel like this is inherently like an item that every Mindthief wants to rush out and get immediately as soon as it's available, I do think now this opens up potentially some interesting fun builds to play around with the Mindthief. So if you are a bit more of a theory crafter, somebody who would like to, you know, get away from playing with the Mind's Weakness, because let's face it, it's way too strong, and so perhaps it would be nice to play a slightly different way, then Psychic Knife could be the good vessel for that. So keep an eye on this one. I feel like this one has a lot of potential and has opened up some builds for the Mindthief for sure. Right, so quick spoiler warning, we are now going to be moving into the unlockable classes from base Gloomhaven. So first up, we have Sun, the big tank from the unlockable characters. Sun Shield has changed slightly. So originally it was when damaged by an attack, you may consume light to gain shield 3 for the attack. It was a single-handed item. I've always found this item to be maybe just a bit overkill, really. Consuming light, which is something that sometimes you want for your other abilities, just to gain shield 3. I think it competes a lot with your other cards and what you wanted to do. And also, you know, shield 3 is a bit overkill, really. At this point in time, you've already got quite a lot of shield. You know, this character has lots of potential for getting shield, especially if you're enhancing the bottom of defensive stance and you've got a permanent shield 2 anyway. So yeah, always felt just a little bit excessive to me. So this has been changed now to shield 2 and retaliate 1 instead. So a little bit more of an offensive capability here, allows you maybe to reflect a little bit of damage back. So a simple change, but actually probably a buff really in the grand scheme of things, because it's just going to allow you to do a little bit more damage, which I really like, and allows those people who really want to play a hardcore tank, and you play very little attack cards, just lots of kind of like heals and shields and stuff, and when you're kind of generating light through cards like Bright Aegis, else, then you're going to have a really good use of that light generation potentially. So I really like that, and because of course you generate light at the end of your turn, potentially you could use that light on the attack that you get attacked that round, which is really cool. So yeah, really down for this one. I think this is generally just a good improvement, and if you are playing Sun, you're gonna want to pick this item up, because it is just a strict kind of best in slot really for this kind of effect. So next we have the Quartermaster and Utility Belt, which has been unchanged from the original version. So during your turn, you or any one ally may refresh one of your spent or consumed items. This is a small item, and this is actually a burn and a permanent loss. You can see by that X in the bottom right hand corner, and that kind of like deck with an X. That means it is a permanent loss. It cannot be recovered. It is gone forever once used, which does make a lot of sense with this character, because otherwise they would just loop it and for infinity, and there's plenty of already broken loops with this character anyway, but who needs another one, right? And yeah, this is a very solid item, really, really useful for this character, plays into your strengths, very on theme. If you have a spare empty item slot, then I'm sure you're going to be wanting to pick this up as the Quartermaster. Even if you're not really playing the kind of looping build, just having something like this to be able to get a very powerful item back is going to be great. So yeah, this is a slam dunk. Just go and grab this if you're playing a Quartermaster. Next up, we have Circles and Phasing Idol, which is when a summon you own is damaged by an attack, it suffers no damage instead. And this is unchanged as well. This is going to be exactly as it originally was in Gloomhaven Digital. This item, I'm a bit so-so on. I don't think it is an amazing item. I think it's just fair. It's fairly reliable. And of course, if you have a really big summon, which you have the level 9 summon on Circles, potentially stopping them from being damaged by a big attack is going to be pretty big, keeping them on the battlefield. So it just gives you almost a little bit of stamina in a way, because then like maybe that monster stays out for a little bit longer, they get an extra turn, and then it means that you don't have to necessarily, like, you lose that burn, then you maybe have to recover cards a bit earlier just to play them again. So it just gives you a bit more safety in playing a few of the big summons like the Unicorn at level 9, which I quite like. It's a small item. You're a character who doesn't have lots and lots of items that you really want, because of course all of your summons really do the work for you. So yeah, this is an absolute fine one to pick up, and you're probably going to have a spare slot for this to easily fit into. So if you are playing Circles, I think this is a very good card to just go and pick up, because it'll do you no harm, and it'll definitely come in use every single scenario that you play. Next, we have Eclipse, and one of the most broken items that was in the original version. Definitely one that needed to be changed. So this has been changed. Originally, it was during your turn, gain invisible and create dark. Small item, and it is a loss. And yeah, very, very strong. This has now been changed, and just the dark element has now been removed. The importance of this is, of course, it doesn't allow you single turn setups for things like Swallowed by Fear or of course Spirit of the Night. So your 2 kill cards now won't be quite as easy, and this will be used more so as a way for you to keep yourself safe, but also maybe to trigger some of your bonuses from attacking from invisibility, which you have through some of your other kind of cards that you play with. So I like this. It's sort of, instead of it being a tool that was maybe predominantly used just by, you know, for the kill cards, it's now actually a tool that maybe be a bit more useful for the invisibility builds, and still just a good item overall. Invisibility cape is an item that you use and you are very, very thankful exists, and so this is basically just going to be another invisibility cloak, but it's going to be in the small item slot for you. So it's an easy pickup for an Eclipse character to go for, because it's just going to keep you being invisible, keep you doing damage through your invisible effects, and keep you safe. So yeah, a very strong solo item, probably one of the strongest solo items really out there still, even without that dark generation. So definitely go pick it up. Next we have Cthulhu, or the Plague Herald, and we have Pendant of the Plague. Now this item has changed very, very slightly, very subtly, but in a very positive way, I think. This used to be, during your turn, poison and curse one enemy within range 3, but it was a head slot item, a spent head slot item. This has now been moved to be a hand slot item instead. Now this is a big change, because head slot items, you can only ever have one. And the thing is that usually people want to go for something like Eagle Eye Goggles, or something else that really kind of benefits the character they're playing, or maybe some of the pendants themselves were very, very strong as well. So The problem is that an item in the head slot is always going to compete with some very, very powerful items. So putting it into the hand slot has now freed that up, and you've now got a really good option here. So just being able to poison and curse one enemy within range 3 every single rest cycle, presumably if you're going to be long resting every time to get this back, is going to be really, really nice. So I feel like this is a great change. It's now in a really favorable spot. In fact, I was actually asked before these changes were made what changes that I would maybe think about making, and this was one of them. I said just make this a different slot. I suggested a small item slot, but they went for a hand slot, which I think is also good because it's a reusable slot as well. So small items are all one use, so it didn't really fit there anyway. So yeah, I really like this one. I think this is a very good change. If you're playing Plague Herald or you plan on playing Plague Herald, definitely go and grab this item because it's just going to do what you want and more so. And then your other hand, you can just have hopefully for a wand for hopefully either your dark element or I guess maybe your air element, depending on which one you can get hold of. Next up, we have the Lightning Bolt, the Berserker, and we have Mask of Death, which remains unchanged in the new DLC. This is anytime you perform a melee attack and you have exactly 1 hit point, add +2 attack to the attack, and this is a head slot item. This is an item that I thought might actually have been changed slightly, mainly because getting to that 1 health hit point is sometimes a little bit tricky. And again, this being a head slot item, it really, really competes with a lot of stuff. I appreciate that they couldn't change too many items too much though, so obviously moving a card called Mask of Death to any other slot would be really anti-thematic and wouldn't really work. And there is a build here that you can go for. You can go for like an on-the-edge kind of build with this to really try and ham it up, but I do think that's quite an investment. This isn't a slam dunk item for me on any Lightning Bolt. I think like if you're playing certain types of Lightning Bolt, you're probably not going to care too much about this. But yeah, this is an okay one. I think it's definitely kind of niche, very suited to a particular way of playing and a particular build. Could be quite interesting if you're playing like a Glass Hammer Resolute Stand build, so might be a good sideboard item if you're planning on maybe coming in to a boss scenario with it. I mean, although it does feel a little bit win more on a situation like that. But yeah, certainly one that maybe you might want to play with for a bit of fun, but I don't think this is suddenly an auto include into every single Lightning Bolt build. So next we have the music notes, the Soothsinger, and we have Master's Loot, which was a very, very powerful item before, so definitely needed a change, and they have nerfed it a little bit. So after performing any song action, immediately perform an attack 2 or move to action, and this is a double hand slot item, so both of your hands, a two-handed item. Now this has been changed now to be a spent rather than a static bonus. So before you just would always get this bonus whenever you perform a song action. Now you are going to have to choose to spend it and then refresh it with a long rest or with other items in order to do it again. So that does make it a lot more limited in its use, but for a character who doesn't really have too many guaranteed kind of hand slot items, I feel like this is kind of okay if you're playing a more supporty build with this character. Of course, if you are playing a aggressive attacking build with this character, which can be a lot of fun, you need to have those hand slots free for other items, which I won't spoil here, but you need to have those hand slot items open and usable. So yeah, this item isn't really usable in that build, but for average song build, I think you don't often have much in your hand slots, maybe a couple of wands, something to help out, you know, support, or potentially you might have like something like a piercing bow for one big attack or something that you might be planning out. So there's really not a lot really that you have going on there. So yeah, I feel like Master Salute for any Soothsinger, it's a pretty easy pickup because you probably don't have anything in your hand slot anyway, and yeah, it's going to do you well. Next up, Angry Face, the Doom Stalker. We have Cloak of the Hunter, which has been changed as well. So it used to be anytime you perform a Doom action, muddle the target of the Doom. The new version of this is actually whenever you perform a Doom action, you can immediately afterwards perform a move 1 action, which is really quite nice. So now when you chuck a Doom down, you're immediately going to get the option to move 1. So you could move away from a target if it was adjacent to you and you just doomed it. You can move a little bit closer if it's a little bit out of range for you, or if you've just doomed something that's like right at the back of the next room or something, you're really far away, just gives you the ability to move forward. And of course, because it's a move 1 action, you can then use some additional movement boots to add on to that to then move even further. So I think that's a really nice way to keep this character moving, and a character that often does struggle with their movement this is something now that's going to kind of give you that. And I really like that. I think that that's a very subtle change. Like, it doesn't feel like it's super impactful, but I think we'll just make this character a lot more fun to play for a lot of people and a lot more kind of easier to play as well. And that goes a long way, I think. The original action of anytime you perform a doom to muddle the target of the doom, I always thought was sort of a little bit weak. But the thing is, there's not many chest slot items that this character ever really wants. So apart from maybe some really high prosperity kind of other cloaks potentially, but I feel like this particular one is, yeah, it's a really good one. So yeah, Cloak of the Hunter with this change, I think is actually definitely one that every Doomstalker should run out and try and grab, because it is a much better version of the original Cloak of the Hunter and will absolutely make your character a lot easier to play, a lot more flexible as well. Next is Sawbones, and his item was the Doctor's Coat, which has been changed. Anytime an ally performs a medical pack or large medical pack action, they add +1 heal to their heal. This was a chest slot item, and so this was the original version of this. This has now been changed to when you give one or more allies a medical pack or a large medical pack, gain 1 medical pack ability card spent. So basically, you can give an additional medical pack. A small medical pack, a regular medical pack can be given in addition. So this is a way for you to get 2 med packs to somebody very quickly, which is a full turn's worth of play, of course. So there is some value to that. This is what I'm kind of interested to see. I disliked the original item. I always thought that it was a little bit more kind of win more, really. Like, do people really care about an additional +1 heal? And I feel like as a chest slot item, you know, I like to play this character fairly aggressively, jumping in and attacking things. So I found that this didn't really kind of play very well with that, because, you know, maybe I wouldn't give med packs out very regularly, or if I did, it was more so just to get XP or just in between turns. So just never really felt hugely impactful. Wherever this new change, getting double, suddenly giving somebody an ability card kind of feels a lot more powerful. So this is one I'm not 100% sold on quite yet, but I do really like this change, and potentially the power level of this might not be quite as maybe it might be quite as obvious to your average player. Maybe that doesn't quite come through at first, but just being able to give somebody a full extra turn of play, especially a character who maybe has had to burn a card to damage earlier on in the round, or potentially already has a very small starting hand, or someone like the Scoundrel with a very small starting hand, just giving them a little bit of extra stamina before they have to long rest can go a long way in a scenario. So yeah, Doctor's Coat, a very interesting change, and one that I think probably most Sawbones will want to go and get now. I don't think maybe every Sawbones will really want this, but I feel like potentially a fair amount of them will, because even if you are playing a more aggressive, attacky kind of build, control attacky build with the Sawbones, I still feel like you give the occasional med pack. So you will have to give up that invisibility cloak, though, that you might have been using. Next is Triangles, the Elementalist, and their item has been changed a little bit, made a little bit better, a little bit easier. So originally it was, if you move 5 or more hexes on your turn, you can create any element, and it is a spent. So once you've done it, you spend it, and then you're going to have to long rest to either refresh it or an item to refresh it. This has now been reduced to just move 3 instead of move 5, which is a really nice change, because now potentially some of those move 2 create element bottoms that before a lot of people would maybe concentrate on getting just like an extra element on there, you can maybe now increase them to a move 3, and now suddenly you're getting this as well. So you're getting like the move 3 and you're getting an additional elements. You're kind of almost getting like a 2-for-1 deal. You know, instead of having to spend all of that gold on enhancing one move 2 with 2 elements, you can just spend a lot less and make it a +1 move, and then you can kind of create the element that you want, right? Once per rest cycle. Really good, very efficient. So I'm a big fan of this change. I think this is going to make this character just feel like a little bit earlier in coming online. Like, the character already struggles early level with feeling like they can really kind of do a lot, because of course if elements are taken away from you, or you fail to generate them, or for whatever reason, you know, you can get stagnated and you can have sort of bad turns. And I feel like this will help to smooth out maybe some of those earlier turns. And perhaps once you can get some loot, really concentrate on getting a +1 move and getting these boots unlocked nice and quickly, and then yeah, you're going to be set up for some really strong turns. So yeah, this is definitely an item now that I think most Triangles characters will want to go for. Not necessarily all of them, because I still feel like at high level plus movement boots are still very strong on a character that otherwise can sometimes struggle. And last but not least, we have the Beast Tyrant. and we have Staff of Command. Now, this has been nerfed pretty heavily, but the actual ability itself remains the same. So after performing a command action, play one card from your hand and immediately perform in the same side of the card, top or bottom, as the command action. And this was a spent item, two-handed. I mean, this was incredibly strong with the concentrated rage buff that you can get with this character. Just ludicrously strong. Was one of the strongest solo items on a character that already outputs a bunch of damage. You can basically already play another one again. It's just, yeah, it was way too strong. So this has now been changed to just a consume item, so it is a single use. It's not a permanent loss, so of course there may be ways for you to be able to get it back through different characters and different means. However, it is now a consume, so you can do it one time, which I think is much more on balance with most of the other solo items. So yeah, if any of the items really needed a big change, like in terms of nerfing, I think Staff of Command was up there, because this was just insane. So glad to see that they've really nerfed and put this in. Does this mean that this is still a must-have item? I do think it kind of is, if you are playing the concentrated rage build on this character. If you are not, then you can maybe skip this. But the thing is with skipping these is that it's 50 gold items. So depending on whether or not you can sell this, I'm not sure if you can sell these to the shop for the 25 gold yet. We will see. They are locked to the characters, but I don't know whether or not that means that you can sell them or not. But if you could sell it, 25 gold still may be worth doing a scenario to get yourself 25 gold in the bank. And maybe on the odd turn, it will actually still pay some dividends if you're playing a more control-y build, because you will still be playing a few command actions as well, just maybe not quite as overpowered as something like Concentrated Rage. So there we have it. There's all 17 items for all 17 base Gloomhaven characters. Some really good improvements there, I think, and some much needed nerfs in other ways. I think if you're playing physical tabletop, then certainly you can translate some of these changes, I would think. Certainly locking them to the mercenaries who actually earn them, I think makes a lot of sense. It's never really been very comfortable with that rule, but yeah, there you go. And that also stops a lot of the troubles sometimes with them being a bit too overpowered or perhaps in quite high demand by other characters too. Also, I feel like some of the kind of nerfs you could use, but maybe you want to pick and choose. Maybe you do enjoy playing with the high power level stuff. But some of the buffs, that's a no-brainer for you to try and include if you can. Well, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Are there any that now you're particularly excited about? Some that you're a bit sad that they've nerfed? Just let me know what all of your thoughts are down below. Thank you for watching, and a big thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon and Twitch, the Patreon people coming up right now. If you would like to support the channel, head over to Patreon. You can get early access to some of my videos over there, and doing some votes at the moment as well on some content that I've got coming up in the pipeline. Don't forget, you can always come over to twitch.tv/ManageRequest every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday if you'd like to catch me live playing Gloomhaven or talking about Gloomhaven. But apart from that, thank you again so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, that's the blessing from Jab.
Yeah.
That's the blessing from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital version?